Excuse me, we're trying to raise money for a Christian youth organization. Would you like to buy a flower?
I'm really in a hurry.
They're only $1.
No,
I don't want to. It won't take long at all.
There's a misconception. I'd never be a Moonie. I've seen them selling flowers on the street corner. They really look spacey and so forth and so on. I'm too smart, I'm too educated, I'm too religious, my mother wouldn't like it and so forth. It couldn't happen to me. And that's the greatest misconception.
It's like falling down a hole, and instead of worrying about you're falling down, you're diving in deeper. I was so excited about the message. I wanted it to be true. That was the most important thing to me. I wanted it to be true, not that I realized it was true.
Are you intelligent, hardworking, interested in helping people? Do you think that you're too smart to ever let anyone control your mind or your thoughts? If you're able to answer yes to these questions, then it may surprise you to know that you're exactly the kind of person that organizations called cults want and get. Today on That's the Spirit, we're going to find out all about cults, what they are, what they do, and why they're able to recruit thousands and thousands of young men and women just like yourselves, or like young people you may know. My name's Mark Cordray. I hope you'll join us.
Today's topic is, I hope, going to be one that's going to be of interest and perhaps a great deal of enlightenment to you, too. Subject of religious cults.
We're at Monsignor Scanlon High School in the Bronx. The speaker, Father James Labar, is with the Office of Communications of the Archdiocese of New York. He has counseled many former cultists.
All of us here today belong to a faith of one sort or another. Presumably, most of you, if not all, are Catholic. You have a set way of belief. You have a set way of worshiping God, and hopefully you're comfortable with that. But you know, the one thing that you can do, if you don't like it, you can get out. A person who is in a cult is missing that freedom. And that's really the gist of what we need to talk about today. Freedom, the individual, and how those two things go together.
In the experience of former cult members, freedom and cult life are in conflict. Cults usually center around a strong personality and often use a variety of subtle, manipulative techniques to attract and hold members. These techniques include the isolation of members from familiar ties and the exploitation of labor in the name of spiritual development. Cults arise in response to times of great social and political change. Though they appear to offer comfort in a changing world, the emotional cost of cult membership can be great. While some cults are relatively harmless, others have been dangerous. Take the tragedies caused by the Manson cult or the horrors of Jonestown. But the dangers of most cults are not so dramatic. The manipulation of the will and freedom of their members takes place over a period of time. Observers believe that there are about 3,500 cults, and that cult membership ranges from the hundreds of thousands to millions of young Americans. This program will explore the troublesome practices of these organizations.
The reason I got caught up in the group was that after all those years of schooling, I wasn't able to realize that a new faith was being presented to me that was different, radically different actually, from the faith that I had. And instead of making a judgment on what was being presented to me, I was taking it like a Baltimore catechism. It was presented to me and you memorize it, and that's what you believe in. And that's exactly what I did in the cult.
John DeBold, Paul Engel, and Lisa Fox were cult members. Though they joined voluntarily, leaving required help from others in a process called deprogramming.
Everything was a gradual process. At first, we were just learning how to love. Then they said, well, eventually maybe you could open up a school and we'll help support the school. And maybe some other of the artists in the community will get involved also. It just sounded supportful.
Initially, what brings people in, obviously, is the idea of doing something good, either for oneself, the community, or for the world, or to serve God. Soon thereafter, it becomes increasingly important that one uses guilt and fear. The guilt that is used is to say that here we have an organization that's serving God. This is the only way to serve God, to better humanity. Therefore, if you leave, you'll do terrible things to not only yourself, but to your ancestors and your descendants.
Exploitation is the name of the game and the sole purpose for the cultic organization to exist.
Galen Kelly is a well-known deprogrammer and associate professor of criminology at Rutgers University.
Why is it destructive? Why is it antisocial? And it comes down to, I think, two reasons that we could talk about. The first being exploitation, and the second being vulnerability. In vulnerability, all of us are vulnerable. All of us can be caught up and seduced into this type of environment. We are vulnerable because destructive cultic organizations are deceptive. Nobody says to you, hey, I'd like you to join Moon's Unification Church, and here's what's going to happen. In 3 weeks, we're going to put you on a van. You're going to eat maybe once a day. What you're going to eat is going to be really garbage. You're going to work 20 hours a day. Your shoes are going to wear out. You're going to be cold. You're going to have a quota of $100, $200, $300 a day that you have to bring back in. It's going to be 7 days a week. You get 1 day off a year. And I'm being very literal. This is the lifestyle. If I said, do you want to do that? What would, no. So this is not the way they come on. They would come on and say, they'd look for you, say, at the bus station with a backpack on your back.
I was due for a vacation, so I took it in San Francisco. I went out with a friend of mine. We got there late at night. The next morning, I was moving from an expensive hotel to a cheaper one, and we were, my friend and I. And there were a couple of people crossing the street as we were walking down the sidewalk who asked us if we were from New York, and we said, yeah. How do you know that we were from New York? And so we just started talking, and in the course of the conversation, they mentioned that they have a farm up in California, up in Northern California.
I had just graduated from college, and I was traveling as Lisa was. And we were in San Francisco, a friend of mine and I, and we were approached by two people, invited to a dinner. And in fact, they even called it a block party. And we said, okay, we'll meet you there. It was like 12 o'clock in midday. And again, we went through the same type of process. We arrived at the house. There was some sing-song and some dinner. And one person got up and spoke a little bit about the group, and then a couple of musicians got up and played music. And we were invited to go to the farm.
I have been wondering.
The following scenes are from a film by Anne Makepeace called Moonchild. The main character and many of the people appearing in the movie are former cult members. The film describes one member's experience.
It's been such a betrayal.
I'm Annie.
Oh, Chris.
Where are you from?
I'm from the Midwest.
Oh.
I just finished school out there, and now it's me in the big world.
In our life, there are times that we are more vulnerable than others, weaker than others. Those times are periods in our life that we're in transition. After we graduate from high school and we're trying to decide, go to college, join the Army, get a job. After our first year of college, do I really want 3 more years of this? In a period of unresolved grief over the death of, say, a parent some years ago, and we have a broken romance. We're at a time of great emotional weakness that we need support systems. And people, to use this other term I mentioned before, can exploit that. There's another element of vulnerability, and that is blatant deception. All of them will tell you, we're saving the world, we're establishing God's kingdom on earth, we're establishing the new political order, we're working for peace and orphans in some foreign country or something. But you strip that away, and you find out that very definitely the cultic organization has very specific goals.
In the initial lectures, had a lot of truth in them and were things that one could readily identify with, especially because of the environment with the people who were very sincere and who were apparently trying to live these, quote, principles, what they called principles.
And in the weekend lecture series where they presented is principle of creation, where the world should be, principle of the restoration, not restoration, the fall of man. The world is terrible. Sure it is. And then they present the principle of restoration, how we can save the world through this group.
They say they want to unite the world and we'll have all religions, but really what they say is that they both get down on Christianity and they get down on Judaism, and they say this is really this is the religion, quote, the religion that should be. Follow Messiah, believe in, quote, these divine principles, and that will lead to a better world.
If they have a leader who directs all attention to himself or herself instead of to God, that's a danger signal. Second point, any group that uses deceitful means in getting you into the group, that's a danger signal. Thirdly, if you have difficulty getting out of the group, if you don't like it, another danger sign or difficulty.
I was there about 10 days and they said, you're good enough to go down to the advanced lectures. And I said, I didn't know what good enough meant, but it was a compliment, I guess. I said, all right, I'll go. I was reluctant again, but they convinced me. I went down to their house in Hurst Street in Berkeley, and they told us Saturday night about Reverend Moon's life story. And I sat there, I remember listening, and I started crying. And it was at that point that I got, I realized that I have to make some kind of decision. Kevin and I made a determined pact we were going to leave the next day.
Kevin is the friend that you originally went out there with.
Right, right. Well, I thought about everything I had heard all Sunday night. Monday morning I woke up and I said to Kevin, I can't go. And he said, why not? I said, well, all through my religious upbringing, grammar school, high school, and college, I've been taught that Christ is the Messiah and he came to save the world, and we should follow him, and the Messiah is going to come again. Reverend Moon, apparently these people feel, is the Messiah. And the people are very nice. They seem to be living their faith like no people I've ever seen before. I have to stay and see if it's true. If it's false, what do I waste? 2 weeks. If it's true and I go, what do I give up?
The friend who I went out with stayed for 4 months. I stayed for 6 months. She had tried to leave a couple of times, but the furthest she got was to the airport. Every time she wanted to leave, she'd have to talk to all the spiritual leaders and then wait for a bus from the camp that's out in the sticks to take her to the city. It got to the point where, well, her parents came out to San Francisco because they were concerned for her. She was up at camp. She found out that her parents were in California, and instead of telling anybody, instead of waiting for a ride down, in the middle of the night around 5 in the morning, she snuck out of camp past the guard. She was scared out of her mind. She hitchhiked down to San Francisco and went home with her parents.
So she actually had to escape?
Yes, because that was the only way.
John's parents weren't so fortunate. They were unable to contact their son. In desperation, John's father left a message.
And he couldn't get through the phone lines at the training camp. He kept getting busy signals or answering services. So he left a message. If I didn't call him by midnight one night, he was going to have the FBI at the door in the morning to come get me out. The group leader, or the camp leader, came up and told me, we have a message from your father. It's an emergency. You have to call home. But before I called home, they more or less briefed me. They said sometimes when people come into the camp, you see, the camp is God's, camp is more or less the only place on earth where God's work is really being done. And it's relatively protected, but Satan will try and break through and pull people out. And I think you should just be careful when you talk to your father.
They were trying to convince you that Satan was working through your father?
Well, you have to understand the member's frame of mind. If I'm leaving, that's a terrible defeat for God because Satan is reclaiming me. In the training camp, I'm under God's protection, and I'm becoming a member of God's side. If I leave the camp, it means Satan has succeeded in stealing what God needs to save the world, people. So while they wouldn't restrain me physically, they would be almost desperate to keep me in there. They'd say almost anything to keep me there.
Everybody, Chris has decided to stay. He's decided to stay. So yes, we do. We don't love anyone.
The camp was a nice place to be. I was being love bombed the whole time.
What do you mean love bombed?
Well, anything I said about myself in a group with the members of the Unification Church was accepted. They said, oh, that's wonderful. You have 7 kids in your family. Isn't that great? And what are you? I'm the second oldest. And some kid would say, oh, I'm the second oldest too. And I come from the East Coast. Somebody else came from the East Coast. So they were constantly reinforcing how great a guy you were. So that's not a difficult situation to be in.
And you believe them, of course.
Yeah, sure.
No one feels brainwashed. I'm not brainwashed, your average Mooney would say. It's subtle. You don't know that it is happening to you when it is occurring. It's not the process of abusive treatment. Mind control is brought about by, and I use the term seemingly nice treatment. They are seemingly nice to you. But let me just say very quickly how it can happen. It's that we as human beings do 3 things constantly. We receive information, we process information, and we reality test information. If you tamper with those 3 things, you can control the individual.
To illustrate Galen Kelly's point, Father Labar uses a simple experiment to demonstrate how mind control works.
On your left palm, which is up, I am now placing a heavy dictionary. On your right hand, I'm tying some balloons that have helium in them. So think of that now. That dictionary is getting heavy, heavy, heavy. Oh, you can hardly hold it up. It's getting heavy. Meanwhile, the other hand is light. And you're going up, up. Oh, that hand is so light, you don't even have to put any weight on it. It's going up. But that dictionary, oh, it's so heavy. It's so heavy. Boy, it's going down. It's going down, down, down. Now, freeze. Open your eyes and look at where your hands are. I don't see any dictionary, do you? No. I don't see any balloons, do you? But I was able, in just a few minutes, to convince them that there was a dictionary there. And that hand went down, down.
Is everybody happy? Yeah! This happy? No! This happy? No! This happy?
Yeah!
Also, mind control is a product of a self-generating pattern. Once you get caught up in the movement, you then start bringing other people into the movement. You simply do to the next person what was your experience. What happened to you, you do to somebody else, and you pass it on down the line.
I was a spiritual parent after like 3 or 4 weeks. Myself, I went out in the streets, we brought in guests, and I invited them to the farm. Then I was their guardian, their spiritual parent. And when I went to the lectures with them and the group meetings, I tried to convince them that this is true. I didn't totally understand it myself, and yet I'm telling them this is the real thing.
The thing in being a family member, a cult member, in talking in a group when we have a new guest come in, is to get them to open up their heart and share the deepest part of them, to make themselves vulnerable. And that's what's picked up on and praised and accepted. And the person feels loved.
Chris, why don't you tell me?
No, I don't. Chris, how about you?
It's always unconditional attention or love that you're giving the person. When you first join, through the meeting on the sidewalk, right through your first couple of weeks in the training camp, everybody loves you, everybody accepts you. Then after you become a member of the group, that acceptance starts to become conditional. How well are you performing? How many people did you bring to dinner? How much money did you bring in? How much work are you doing?
What do they do with the money they raise? Can you see visible works of charity? Can you see education works? Can you see what they do with the money? Or does it go to make the leader rich and comfortable? And lastly, what kind of life do you lead in the group? Is it one that deprives you of freedom and individual choice?
Eventually, I was sent out on what they call a mobile fundraising team. And that entailed selling flowers or selling jewelry or some kind of trinkets out on the streets, starting very early in the morning, running until very late at night, every day, all day long. The purpose of the MFT, I was told, was to develop yourself spiritually. So the money really didn't have anything to do with it. The money would be used by Unification Church, but your reason for being there was to grow your own spirituality. I didn't really enjoy it, but I went out and I sold the flowers every day. Until one night, I was out in the Midwest, and a gentleman approached me and he said, "What are you selling?" And I was selling little furry animals, and I started to describe them to him, and he grabbed me. He wrapped his arms around me, and he said, "Get him," and another guy from behind me grabbed me. And right away I screamed. I said, "The kidnappers!" And the reason I said kidnappers was I had heard about deprogrammers. And right away I was, oh no! And there was this van on the side of the street, and the van door ripped open and my father jumped out. And he wrapped his arms around me. And the three of them picked me up and threw me in the van. And we started driving to a nearby hotel.
Put me down. Calm down, kid. Come on, calm down. Put me down.
Well, I sat against the side of the van and I was almost panicking. And I just had my head buried in my hands. And my father was patting me on the back. He says, "Don't worry, it's all over. Everything's going to be all right." And I was thinking inside, it's just beginning. How could you do this? I mean, you don't realize what you've done. We went to a hotel room, and Galen Kelly, my deprogrammer, said to me, "Well, there's a couple of different things we can do." And by then I was relatively calm. He said, "We can sit down and talk, we can get something to eat, or you can go to sleep." It was like 11:30. I said, "I'm going to sleep." I didn't want to have anything to do with any of them. I just said, "I'm going to sleep." So I lied down on my bed, clothes on, sneakers on. They said, you can take your clothes off and get under the covers and go to sleep. And I said, no way. Because inside I thought, they're going to take my clothes. Then I really can't get out of here. I woke up the next day, and the first thing they did was give me something to eat, and they sat down and talked to me. And I was filled with hatred. But Galen and I gradually developed a dialogue. And what it came down to was, I said, "Galen, you can tell me as much as you want, but obviously it's one side of the story, and I'm just going back to find out the other side." He said, "Sure, fine, just give me some time to present my side."
Lisa, what did your family, what were they able to communicate to you that pulled you out?
Well, they came out to California, and we had a heart-to-heart talk, and they broke it down crying, asking if I would talk to somebody else. I was furious at the time, but they said I gave 6 months of my life listening to this one point of view. If I could give an hour or so to hear something else.
I think one of the things that was helpful, certainly, was when I saw my father out in California. He was allowed to come out and see me. I was not allowed at that point to come back to New York. One of the things that he said was very important was that, I just want you to be free to live your own life. And later on, I was able to see, even by using their own principles, how the cult was the most selfish in wanting my life, my body, and my soul forever, taking everything from me, and my father really wanted just to give me back my freedom.
I sat down at breakfast, and we were talking about the Yankees or some kind of sports team, and I started crying. And I looked up at my father, and I said, "I've dedicated my life to a Messiah. I'm fully determined to follow him for the rest of my life, and now you're telling me it's not true." what if it isn't true? What else can compare? What else can I do that even compares to following the Messiah? And it was important in that it was the first question I really asked that was generated from deep within inside me. It was the first question that I was asking of myself, is it true or isn't it true? Up until then, I had just given pat answers. And that was my beginning point of the deprogramming. I snapped. And it was at that point that I began to move back into a normal lifestyle.
I think each one of us can play a tremendous role in preventing young people from going into the cult routine simply by, first of all, perfecting ourselves in the art of listening. They need
Father Mark Connolly.
to listen to them. Secondly, by being a guide, not someone who preaches at them, but someone who will see them through this particular period. And third, by the lifestyle. They need a model.
A lot of young people turn to cults for what are initially positive reasons. They want to help society or simply do good. Can the church provide an outlet for that kind of motivation?
Well, I think the church and the synagogues have a twofold role. First, to remind these young people they are being manipulated. And after that has been done, they can say to these young people, look, if you want to better the lot of mankind, we have this organization, this group, this approach, this method that you can partake in, and you can be sure that you're not being deceived or manipulated or exploited.
When I was in the Unification Church, I just thought it was a continuation of the Catholic faith. It was the next step. After I left, it took me a couple of weeks, but I went back to church, and I went regularly. And at this point, I still consider myself a Catholic. But the faith that I have now is very different from the faith I had before, in the sense that it's a faith that's deep within inside me.
If you want to help someone who's being recruited by a cult, call these telephone numbers. Task Force on Cults, 212-921-5505. Jewish Board of Family and Children's Services, 212-860-8533. Citizens Freedom Foundation, 518-756-8014.
For more information about today's topic and an edited transcript of the program, send $2 to That's the Spirit, Post Office Box 500, Pelham, New York, 10803.